She thought it was just another evening, but when he reached for his phone, her world crumbled. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments from where are you watching this video. The evening had begun like any other. They were sitting at the dining table, the soft glow of the chandelier casting a warm light over the room. The clinking of silverware against plates filled the air, accompanied by the occasional sip of wine. It was a familiar scene, one that had played out countless times before. But then, without warning, he reached for his phone. The screen lit up, casting an eerie light on his face. His expression changed in an instant. His eyes widened and his lips parted slightly, as if he had seen something that made his blood run cold. He quickly silenced the phone and placed it face down on the table. But the damage was done. She had seen the flicker of something that didn't belong in their life together. A seed of doubt was planted, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their world was about to change in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The room seemed to shrink as the weight of that moment settled over her. She recalled the countless evenings they had shared, the laughter, the quiet conversations, the sense of security that had once filled their home. Now that security felt fragile, like a glass vase teetering on the edge of a table. She thought about the routine they had built together, the predictable rhythm of their lives, and how this one moment had introduced a discordant note. Her mind wandered back to the early days of their relationship, when every glance, every touch, every word held a significance that now seemed lost. She remembered the way he used to look at her, with eyes full of adoration and promise. But now his eyes were clouded with a mixture of guilt and fear, a look she had never seen before. It was as if he had been carrying a secret, something heavy that he could no longer conceal. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. She wanted to ask him what was wrong, to demand an explanation for the change in his demeanor. But something held her back, a fear of what she might discover. She was torn between the desire to confront him and the dread of unsettling the delicate balance of their relationship. As the minutes ticked by, the silence between them grew more oppressive. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat a reminder of the uncertainty that now loomed over them. She tried to focus on her meal, to pretend that everything was fine, but her appetite was gone. The food on her plate seemed irrelevant, a trivial matter compared to the storm brewing inside her. She glanced at him occasionally, trying to read his expression. His eyes were fixed on his plate, avoiding hers, and his usual calm demeanor was replaced by a visible tension. His hands moved mechanically as if he were going through the motions of eating without any real awareness. It was clear that his mind was elsewhere, consumed by whatever had been revealed on that phone screen. The evening wore on, and the gap between them seemed to widen. She felt isolated, alone in her thoughts, unable to bridge the chasm that had suddenly opened up. She wondered if she had the strength to confront him, to face whatever truth was lurking in the shadows of their relationship. Or would she choose to ignore it, to pretend that everything was still the same, hoping that the storm would pass on its own? As the night drew to a close, she realized that she couldn't avoid the truth forever. The subtle shift in his behavior had awakened a part of her that she had long suppressed, a part that demanded answers and clarity. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she also understood that she couldn't move forward without confronting the doubts that now haunted her. In that moment, she made a decision. She would not let the uncertainty consume her. She would seek the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And with that resolve, she steeled herself for what was to come, ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that their relationship would never be the same again. "Did you check the weather?" he asked casually. But when she glanced at his phone, she saw something impossible. It began quietly. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just small, almost imperceptible shifts in the way he moved through their life together. He lingered longer in front of the mirror in the mornings, chose his shirts more carefully. She noticed how his scent had changed. His cologne had taken on a sharper, newer note, something fresher than the familiar comfort she used to nuzzle into. The change was subtle but deliberate, not for her. She would have known if it were for her. At first, she brushed it off. People change. Habits evolve. Maybe he was just making an effort again, trying to feel good in his skin. She wanted to believe that, needed to, but that quiet suspicion began to plant itself in the back of her mind, rooting deeper with every passing day. He started coming home later. Never dramatically late, just 20 minutes, maybe 45. Enough to be justifiable. He always had a reason. The traffic was bad, or we stayed to finish up the pitch, or you wouldn't believe how long the client talked. His tone was always casual, his smile always ready, but it never quite reached his eyes anymore. She noticed how his phone rarely left his side. It used to rest untouched on the kitchen counter, or lay forgotten on the nightstand while they talked or watched TV. Now it was always in his hand, face down, screen dark unless he needed to check something. Sometimes it would buzz faintly on the table. He'd glance quickly and then press it silent without a word. She pretended not to notice, but her heart always did. One evening, they were getting ready for bed. She was folding laundry, and he had just stepped out of the shower. He rubbed a towel through his hair and said, almost too casually, "Can you check tomorrow's weather?" "My phone's on the nightstand." She walked over, her fingers reaching automatically. His phone was already unlocked. The screen lit up with a gentle glow as she tapped the weather app. 12 degrees, cloudy, chance of rain. But then, just beneath it, telegram. A message previewed softly on the top banner. A name she didn't recognize. Wish today hadn't ended so soon. Her breath caught. Her heart didn't drop. It froze, then hammered against her ribs so loud she thought he might hear it. She didn't open the thread. She didn't need to. Those words were enough. She wasn't stupid. She had been loved once. And she had written things like that once. When love was new and reckless and didn't belong to someone else, she locked the phone quickly and placed it back exactly where it had been. When he came in, she handed it to him with a small smile. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't crack. She climbed into bed beside him and lay still, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts roaring behind her eyes. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did. Maybe he saw something different in her silence. Maybe he felt the shift too. But he said nothing. Just dimmed the lights and curled under the sheets as if nothing had changed. The days that followed felt surreal. She watched him more closely now, not because she didn't trust him, but because she no longer trusted herself not to see what was clearly there. She started keeping track of things. The time he left for work, the way he smiled when his phone buzzed, how quickly he excused himself from the table if he received a message. He was careful, but not careful enough. He mentioned a new project, one that required longer hours and more collaboration. He didn't say who he was collaborating with, and she didn't ask. She wasn't ready to hear the name. Not yet. The silence between them had taken on a new texture, heavy like thick velvet curtains draped over windows to keep out the truth. One night she asked if he wanted to go for a walk, just the two of them. He hesitated for a second too long before agreeing. As they strolled through quiet streets, their hands barely brushed. She asked about his day, and he answered with practiced ease. But she could tell his mind was elsewhere. Maybe with the same person who had sent that message. Maybe imagining what today would have looked like if it had ended differently. She found herself playing back old conversations in her head, looking for clues she might have missed. Had he mentioned a coworker too often? Had he laughed too hard at some story she didn't fully understand? She remembered a woman's name, one he had mentioned once or twice before. Smart, ambitious. "She's sharp," he had said with admiration. She had nodded then, not realizing that a seed had already been planted. But it wasn't just about the woman. It wasn't even just about the message. It was about the way he had started carrying part of his life where she couldn't reach it, a private corner of his heart that no longer belonged to her. That absence, that invisible wall, hurt more than any betrayal she could see. And still she said nothing. Not because she was afraid to confront him, but because she wasn't sure what she wanted the truth to be. If she asked, he might deny it, or worse, he might tell her the truth. That he had grown close to someone else, that he didn't mean to, that it just happened, that he didn't know how to stop it. And what would she do then? She still loved him. That was the cruelest part. She still saw the man who held her hand during hospital visits, who made late-night tea when she couldn't sleep, who built a life with her brick by careful brick. But now she also saw someone she didn't recognize, someone with secrets. So she waited, in silence, watching, listening, trying to figure out whether she was preparing for a confrontation or an ending, because now every smile he gave her felt like an apology for something he hadn't confessed. Every kiss was shadowed by the absence of truth, and every quiet evening stretched longer, filled with a silence that asked too many questions. And she answered none of them. It didn't matter how careful he was. The truth always leaves fingerprints. She wasn't trying to catch him. Not really. If anything, she was still clinging to the hope that it had all been in her head, a trick of insecurity, a symptom of distance. But the mind does strange things when it's searching for answers it doesn't want to find. She began to notice things more sharply now. The way his phone never left his person, the way his eyes flicked toward it when it buzzed, the occasional flash of something on the screen too quickly swiped away. He had grown more cautious, and in that caution, she saw confirmation. They were having dinner again. It was a Thursday. He had brought home takeout, her favorite, without her asking, a small gesture that once would have warmed her. But now it felt like a distraction, like a magician's sleight of hand. She smiled, thanked him, and they sat across from each other. The sound of clinking utensils filled the quiet spaces between them. He talked about work, about a funny moment in a meeting, about the client who wouldn't stop calling. She nodded, listened, responded, but a part of her wasn't there. A part of her was watching for that flicker in his eyes, that twitch in his voice when he mentioned a name. Then it happened. He picked up his phone mid-sentence, saying he wanted to show her something, a meme or a chart she couldn't remember. As he tapped the screen, a new message popped up before he could hide it. It was her name, not his wife's, the other one. "I miss your laugh. Even just seeing your name makes my day better." She didn't breathe, didn't blink. Her eyes locked on the words just long enough. Just long enough to confirm what she'd feared, but hadn't dared to believe. He didn't realize what she'd seen. Or maybe he did, and hoped she hadn't. He fumbled the screen away and kept talking, pretending nothing had happened. But she wasn't listening anymore. The world around her went quiet, as if the sound had been drained from the room. Her fork lay idle in her hand. She felt her chest tighten, her throat close. And yet she didn't speak. She had seen the name before. Briefly, a mention here, a comment there. A woman at work, smart, reliable, gets things done. She had never thought much of it at the time. It hadn't felt threatening. But now those passing mentions took on a new shape. The laughter he brought home with him some nights didn't feel so harmless anymore. The warmth in his voice when he said her name wasn't just professional. It never had been. Her thoughts spun wildly. How long had it been going on? Was it emotional? Physical? Did it matter? The betrayal wasn't in the action. It was in the hiding, in the pieces of himself he had given away without her knowing. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation. But she just sat there, paralyzed beneath the weight of that one message. He finished his meal. She barely touched hers. Her hands were cold. Her wine tasted sour. Her skin felt too tight around her bones. Later that evening, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. Her face looked unchanged, but something inside her had shifted. She tried to imagine confronting him, tried to imagine asking, "Do you love her?" But the words stuck in her throat. Not because she didn't want to know, but because she already did. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breath, wondering if he was dreaming of someone else. The darkness pressed in on her like a secret trying to escape. She closed her eyes and saw the message again. Not just the words, but the tenderness in them. He hadn't just stumbled into a mistake. He had built something, a connection, a parallel world where she didn't exist. In the morning, he kissed her cheek goodbye. His lips were warm, but she felt nothing, just silence. She watched him walk out the door with the same ease he had every day. Only now she knew he wasn't just heading to work. He was heading towards someone else. She wanted to follow him, to see it with her own eyes, to catch them in the act. But what would that change? The truth was already hers. It had been delivered in plain text. more honest than anything he had said in weeks. She began replaying their recent months, every delay, every excuse, every extra shift and skipped dinner. All of it now made sense in painful, crystalline clarity. He hadn't stopped loving her overnight, but he had let someone else in. And that was a door that, once opened, couldn't be shut without a cost. Still, she said nothing. Not yet. She needed time. Not to gather evidence, but to gather herself, her dignity, her voice. The pain was real, but so was her strength. She would not crumble over someone else's confusion. If he didn't know who he wanted, she would decide what she deserved. But in that moment, she stayed silent. Because once the truth was spoken aloud, there would be no taking it back. And she wasn't ready for the world to break just yet. She just needed one more night to grieve the version of her life that had existed before the message. One more night to remember what it felt like to believe she was the only one. She could have looked the other way, but silence would have meant surrender, and she wasn't ready to disappear. The truth had settled into her bones like cold rain, silent, persistent, impossible to ignore. She walked through the house as if she were haunting it, a ghost in her own life. Every room echoed with memories that now felt blurred at the edges. Their laughter, their routines, their rituals of love had all been rewritten by a single thread of digital words. Yet she hadn't confronted him. Not yet. She needed to understand what she was fighting for, or against. In the days that followed, she became an observer. She noticed how he smiled at his phone when he thought she wasn't watching, how his mood shifted depending on his screen rather than the world around him. There was a lightness in him that she hadn't seen in months, and the realization was gutting. He was happy somewhere else, with someone else. But still, he came home to her, slept next to her, ate meals she prepared, said, "I love you" out of habit, not depth. And that routine, once comforting, now felt like a lie performed on stage. She questioned herself constantly. Was she overreacting? Was emotional betrayal enough to ruin everything they had built? Had she neglected him without realizing it? Guilt and anger took turns pulling her under. But no matter how many ways she twisted the narrative, it always returned to the same truth. He had chosen to give someone else a piece of his heart that once belonged only to her, and she hadn't been given the chance to say whether that was okay. She began to write, not to him, not to the woman, but to herself. In the quiet hours of the night, when the weight of pretending became unbearable, she poured her thoughts into the pages of an old notebook she hadn't touched in years. The ink bled like wounds, her words both anchor and lifeline. She wrote about the first time they met, the warmth in his voice, the plans they made. Then she wrote about the slow fading of intimacy, the distance he never acknowledged, the loneliness of being loved out of memory rather than choice. And finally, she wrote about the moment everything changed, the message that shattered the illusion and left her alone with the pieces. But writing wasn't enough. One evening, she came home from the grocery store to find him on the couch, laughing quietly at something on his phone. He looked up, met her eyes, and smiled. The same smile he had given her 1,000 times. But now it felt borrowed, like it had been rehearsed somewhere else. She stood frozen in the doorway, the grocery bags dangling from her hands, her heart hammering in her chest. She decided that night, not out of rage, not even out of heartbreak, but out of a quiet need to reclaim her voice. She waited until they had both settled into bed. He lay beside her, scrolling. She turned to him, calm but clear. Her voice didn't tremble. "I saw the message," she said. The stillness that followed was immediate, heavy, suffocating. His hand froze on the screen. He didn't look at her at first. She watched his profile as the realization dawned. And then slowly, he turned his head, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. But he said nothing. "You don't have to lie," she continued. "I just want to understand. I deserve that." He sat up. The silence between them stretched long and tense. Then he spoke, and his voice was small, smaller than she had ever heard it. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said. She believed him. But that didn't make it better. That made it worse, because it meant it had happened quietly, naturally, without intention, without resistance. It meant she had been fading from his heart while he still kissed her goodbye each morning. There was no sharp betrayal, no moment she could point to and say, "Here, this is where it broke." It had crumbled slowly, softly, beneath the weight of everything left unsaid. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply asked the questions that had been gnawing at her in the dark. How long had it been going on? Did he love her? Was it over? His answers came in fragments, full of pauses and half-truths. He spoke of confusion, of loneliness, of how he hadn't known how to tell her that he felt lost. He said it wasn't physical. She didn't care. She had seen the look in his eyes when he read those messages. It was intimacy, and it was enough. She got up in the middle of the night and sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at her reflection in the mirror again. She didn't look broken. She didn't look angry. She looked exhausted. But beneath the weariness, something was rebuilding. She felt it like a flicker, a steadying breath of defiance. She thought of the women who stay silent, who bury their pain beneath layers of forgiveness they were never ready to give, who tell themselves that if they love hard enough, it will go away. She could do that. She could stay, smile, carry on. But at what cost? And then another thought came, just as clear. She was not responsible for his loneliness. She had not failed him. Love doesn't vanish without permission, and he had given his away. So when the morning came and the sun rose on a new day, she walked into the kitchen, poured herself a coffee, and said nothing. She had already said enough. The weight of truth had been laid bare. Now it was his turn to carry it. She didn't know what would happen next, if she would stay, if she would forgive, if she could ever forget. But for the first time in weeks, her silence wasn't a burden. It was a boundary. She was no longer waiting for him to choose her. She had chosen herself. She had forgiven thoughtless words, cold shoulders, even silence. But this was the kind of fracture you don't walk away from untouched. The days after the confrontation unfolded in strange, quiet waves. The initial storm had passed. There was no more shouting, no hidden messages, no half-truths waiting to be uncovered. But peace didn't return either. Instead, their home filled with the heavy air of limbo, of waiting. Everything felt uncertain now, like standing on a bridge suspended between two cliffs, the life they had built and the one she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. He tried to make things right in the way men sometimes do when they don't know how to repair something that's no longer visible. He offered comfort, made coffee in the mornings, cleaned up after dinner, kissed her forehead before work. All of it felt practiced, a gesture to say, "I'm still here." But she knew that presence wasn't always proof of commitment. Sometimes people stayed out of guilt, not love. Sometimes they reached for routine instead of reckoning, and she wasn't looking for routine anymore. She was looking for truth. She had never imagined herself here, stuck between memory and reality. There had been harder times in their marriage, sure. They had weathered money troubles, job changes, family losses. She had forgiven him before, for careless words, for neglecting her needs when he was too focused on everything else. She'd excuse things because she believed in who he was underneath. But this was different. This wasn't forgettable. It wasn't fixable with flowers or apologies. It had changed the shape of them. And yet, she still loved him. That was the cruel part. Love didn't dissolve on command. It didn't vanish because someone failed you. It lingered, stubborn and aching, long after it stopped feeling safe. She looked at him across the table and remembered the way he held her hand when her father died. She heard his laugh echoing from a holiday years ago. She saw the man who had once made her believe she would never be alone again. And sometimes, in quiet moments, he still looked at her like she was the center of his world. That made it worse. The other woman remained a shadow, nameless, faceless, defined only by the ache she had left behind. Part of her wanted to meet her, to see what had drawn him away, to compare. But deep down, she knew it wasn't about looks or charm or even connection. It was about the moment, two people drifting close when they should have stepped back. A temptation fed by distance and silence and the lie that it wouldn't go too far. But it had, and now everything was different. People around her started to notice. Friends would ask, gently, if everything was all right. She smiled too easily, said she was just tired. No one wants to explain that they're living with a person who no longer feels like home. No one wants to say that they're mourning a marriage that technically still exists. So she lied and hated herself for lying. Her mother called one afternoon, her voice soft but sure, the way it always had been. You don't have to decide today, she said, but you do have to decide for yourself. Not for him, not for appearances, for you. She sat with those words for a long time. One night she packed a small bag and drove to the coast alone. No explanation, no drama, just space. She walked along the shoreline as the tide crept in, the waves pulling at the sand like time erasing old footprints. She stood still, eyes closed, letting the wind cut through her. For the first time in weeks, she felt her own pulse again, felt herself as separate from him, whole even if bruised. She imagined two paths, one where she stayed and they rebuilt, day by day, with scars and therapy and promises, and one where she left, started over somewhere new, relearned the world without him in it. Neither path looked easy. Both looked painful. But one thing was clear. There was no going back to what they had before. That version of them had already died. What remained now was a choice between what could be built and what could be released. When she returned home, he was waiting on the porch. His eyes looked tired but hopeful. I don't know what to say, he told her. She nodded. Neither do I. They sat side by side, not touching. The silence between them wasn't angry anymore, just full of truth. I still love you, he said. I know, she replied, but love isn't always enough. She didn't make a decision that night, or the next, but something inside her had shifted. She wasn't afraid anymore, not of the pain, not of the future, not of being alone. The worst had already happened. The lie had already been shattered. Now, all that remained was the slow, aching work of choosing herself, and maybe, just maybe, letting go of what had been so she could discover who she was beyond it. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next video. Feel free to share this video with others and check out more stories on our channel.